All right, let's talk about where we're going, what we got left. So today, I'm going to start on environmental law. I'm going to work on an overview of some of the major federal environmental laws that we have, and then we're going to get to a little more detail on just a couple of them, just to kind of give you an example of how all that works. And then on Thursday, I have invited, I've forgotten his name, but he is a lawyer in CSU's legal department, and he is a CSU alum. And he's going to come and talk to us about just his job and kind of some of the things that he does as a lawyer for the university. And we'll have some question and answer. So y'all be your usual engaged selves and ask good questions. We don't really have a format for it, but we're just going to kind of do like we do on our discussion days and talk. There will be an assignment on what he says, so I do need you to come and be prepared and pay attention to that. I haven't decided yet about what the assignment will be for environmental law, because I don't know that I'm going to finish it today, so I think I might need next Tuesday to finish it. So the assignment is probably going to be for next week on environmental law. I haven't, this is the first time I've actually taught environmental law, so I don't have anything prepared, and I'm sort of feeling out how that ought to go. But you will have some sort of assignment on environmental law. You don't really have an outline this week. I've just selected 4 kind of mini articles on different environmental law topics for you to read. I know you haven't read them yet because the content just went up at midnight last night, but between now and next Tuesday, hopefully you'll get a chance to do that. And then when I say Tuesday, I mean Tuesday after Thanksgiving. We will finish up environmental law that week. That'll be week 15. And then we will prepare for the exam that Thursday and maybe Tuesday if we have some extra time. But I want to talk a little bit about that and about grades for a second. So I think your exam is worth like 15% of the final grade. Is that right? Does anybody check that recently? Is that correct? Okay. And so it is comprehensive, but I'm going to tell you what's on it. So I'm not giving you the questions, but for example, if I have content from contracts on the final exam, I might say, you need to look at consideration, you need to look at statute of frauds, you need to look at this topic. The point is that I do think it's important to kind of test you on, to give an overall test on what we've done, but I don't think it's productive for anybody to waste time. So I don't want you to just study everything we've done this semester without knowing what's on the exam. So I'm kind of going to narrow it down for you to tell you what's on it. If it's not on my study guide that I give you, then it won't be on the exam. The exam is take home. It's just like our quizzes. It's going to be multiple choice, true, false. You can use your notes. You can use whatever I've put in the content. I mean, I think you've figured out by now there's really nothing you can look up on the internet that'll help you on the quizzes. So it'll all be from stuff I've given you. Be no surprises. It'll be very similar to the questions that the question format and content that you've already covered. So that's how that works. And then I also give you a window of several days to do your final exam. So you won't be coming in person. You won't have a set time to do it. You can just do it as is convenient for you throughout your exam week. Because I always think can sometimes be unfair the way the exam schedule works out if you've got like 3 in one day or 2 one day. I mean, like that doesn't fit how college students study. So we cram for one, then we need a couple days to cram for the next one, and then the next. So that's how that works. Is there any questions about that? All right, let's talk about grades for a second. I need y'all to hear this. So when the way the grade sheet is set up right now, when I set that up, it gives me 2 choices. One choice is that it will calculate stuff that you haven't done as a 0. And then another way is it will drop anything that's ungraded. So during the semester, I set it to where it drops anything that's ungraded, and that way you've got a better idea of how you're doing based on the work you've actually done. But that's not entirely accurate as to how it might be in a final grade calculation. Because if you didn't turn in an assignment, when we get time to calculate the final grade, that's going to be a 0. And I don't think it's calculating that right now. I guess your professors may do it differently. Y'all are probably used to all that by now. That was sort of new to me that was how you could set it up. But anyway, just know that if you have not done an assignment, it might not be reflecting properly in your grade calculation. It might be being dropped now, but it won't be later. If anybody's confused about their grade, let me know. We'll just talk about it. I don't like uncertainty about that, and I know you all don't like uncertainty about grades. So if I'm confusing things or muddying the waters, let me know. If anybody wants to have a private conference, Zoom, on the phone, in person, between now and the end of the semester, I'm wide open. Y'all just let me know. I do need to plan it because I'm not on campus except for when I come for this class. And I'm glad to make time for you, but I just need to know. So if you got questions, or if you're worried about something, or you're not sure where you stand, now is the time to ask. Yes, ma'am. Exam week is, I don't know exactly. Does anybody know? Luciana? Is this Thursday? Oh, it is? I kind of do. I thought we had a full week 15. My bad. Oh, okay. Well, let me think about that. I thought we always had 15 weeks. We just have 14 weeks? Maybe that's right. I probably shouldn't have punted on last week then, in retrospect. Okay. I'll let y'all know. I'm glad y'all brought that up. I'll have an answer for you on Thursday. If we're done after Thursday, we're done after Thursday. That's fine. What I can do is just give you the study guide and I can set up a Zoom time if anybody wants to ask questions or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Yes, ma'am. The exam will have a time limit. It should be plenty of time, though. Has anybody run out of time on any of my quizzes? I set the time to where you shouldn't run out of time, but you also shouldn't have so much time that you can just do your reading while you're taking the quiz. But if you're able to do that, congratulations. Good job. I'm very interested in your thoughts on how we can do this better, things that worked, things that didn't work, things you liked about this class, things you didn't. I know we have the survey, but I don't really feel like sometimes it's not specific and helpful enough to this class. I'd rather you just tell me, but I'm very interested in things that worked, things that didn't work, things that I can do to make it better for you guys. So if you've got input in those areas, please let me know. I'd love to hear that. Actually was talking to KK this morning about this, and the questions that I have are, how do I get you guys to read? What's the most effective way to, and the answer is, by the way, to the reading thing is, if you don't want to read, you're not going to read. But that's why I got rid of the textbook. But this is my first semester without the textbook, so I'm still kind of figuring out the best way to deliver the information to y'all, but also to be fair in how I'm asking you to learn it. I feel like the more you read, the more you're going to learn. The more you come to class, the more you're going to learn. But I also know there's a fine line between your other classes, your sports, your families, your jobs, things like that. So I want it to be, kind of want to hit the right balance of all that. So if anybody has input into that, please let me know. I really want to know how we can do things better. Before I start lecture, one other thing I want to mention is internships. So this is probably too much information, but when I was interviewing for this to get the full-time job here, I had been just teaching part-time for the last 3 years. And I'm pretty sure I was the only one who made it. I was the only one that was interested in the job. So they didn't have a lot of leverage. But during our sort of negotiations, I didn't end up having to do advising, and I didn't end up having to teach the Introduction to Business Law course, which I think they stick new professors with. I'm pretty sure none of the longtime professors have to do that. But in exchange for not having to do that, I got assigned the internship program, which is fine. I'm actually really glad it worked out that way. So I'm curious to know from y'all, do you know about the internship program? How is it communicated? How are opportunities communicated to you? I know we've got this handshake thing. I've got to meet with the lady who's in charge of handshake to kind of explain it to me because I don't really understand that. But I feel like that my sense of internships from being involved with it for 3 months is that students don't know as much as I think they should about the opportunities that are out there. For example, I asked one student about it. We were talking about it, and he didn't know that you could get course credit for them. So absolutely, you can get course credit for a job that you're working. The way that Dean Kidder kind of described it to me is that if you're working already, I'm going to take Cade as an example. You work at Texas Roadhouse. Worked there for how many years? Almost 6 years. So if he came to me and said, I want to get course credit for my job, we don't approve that necessarily. Like, you're not going to get credit for doing something you're already doing. But there's an easy way around that. If you can work with your employer to figure out an extra project or an extra dimension or feature to your job where you might be learning about the budgeting or the ordering for the restaurant or the marketing for the restaurant, or some of the management or the scheduling. So if Cade wanted to take on some additional responsibilities that would be applicable and, pertinent to what the business school does, then he could get credit for that. So I just want to encourage y'all, if you didn't know about that and you're not sure about whether or not your job might qualify, call me. We'll figure out a way to make it work. Because if you're already working, then it makes sense for you to figure out a way for you to get credit for it. Internships, there's no requirement that you get paid. So some of them would be unpaid. But I know a lot of people that get paid. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that you could get a paid internship. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, if this is our last week of class. I do want you to read the environmental law stuff, and I'm going to talk about that briefly today. But this could be the last time that we get to talk about other things. So if that's the case, I want to pivot to some other stuff as well. While we're on topic, anybody have ideas on this class that they want to share now? Let's talk about it. Nobody. Yes, King.
I don't know if it's more. I think it just would have been fun to do like kind of like a project where like one day like we hold a course in class.
Okay.
Kind of like
I like that idea. Okay. I like that. There, one of the other professors who's not here now, but she did she found these activities that were like create a law day, or you had to write a contract or something, but it was more interactive that way. And I think she said her students enjoyed that. So that might be something we could do. I would love to bring in some lawyers and just let y'all watch them go at it. That would be It might scare the hell out of you. Well, I don't think the CSU lawyer and I are going to go at it on Thursday. He'll never come back. Well, I don't know. I think that the people I know, y'all would be like, I don't know that I can get away with a family law dispute coming into the business law course, but I'll think about that. So while we're on topic, this is the way I think about this class. It's impossible to teach the law. I mean, that's way beyond the scope of this class. I mean, we spend 1 week talking about an area of the law that you'd spend a year on in law school. You guys, anybody taking the HR class? I mean, that's basically a semester-long class on employment law, or a lot of it is employment law. We do that in a week or two. So my goal is to expose you to all the different areas of the law and then get you used to how those issues come up in business and get you used to how courts think about these issues and what happens through the lens of litigation if somebody gets sued, so that you can then plan your conduct and plan your activities with a general knowledge of what areas you might be dipping your toe into. We don't memorize the law. In law school, you don't memorize the law. The law changes, number one. The law is different from state to state. So yes, you are learning about it, but the main goal in law school is to learn to think like a lawyer. And so in this class, I want to expose y'all to that thought process. The critical thinking component is important to me. Ideally, I would like to have every assignment that we do every week be written response, which y'all would assassinate me for. But that's really the way you learn this class. But practically speaking, I mean, I don't have, I have 90 students, including the online classes, and there's just no way to grade that many assignments every week. And plus, I think that might be a little much. So I struggle with the balance between, I don't have a problem with exposing y'all to different things. My challenge is just I need to make sure that you're reading it and learning it. And that's hard to do. And I had some good insight into this. Like, for example, earlier in the semester, more people were prepared for class and did the reading than they were later in the semester. And I think that's because y'all figured out, well, we can get by. He's going to tell us what we need to know. We're going to discuss our way through it. I can bluff it if I need to, but I'll get what I need. So my goal is just always, I really want to expose y'all to information that's helpful and interesting, but I also try to figure out how I can get you to, read it and do it and respond to all that. So this may not be the right time for this discussion, but if anybody has ideas, I love that idea, Mr. Spates. And I'd like to do more stuff like that. I think that's more valuable to you sometimes than just learning some nuts and bolts. Anybody else? Nobody else. Well, how do y'all feel about like projects or papers or research? No, everybody's shaking their head. Is that? You do like that? Yeah. I think that's maybe the most important component of this class. But you got to be prepared for it, or else it's not going to make any sense. So that's where I guess I could give a pop quiz the first 10 minutes of every class, but that feels a little. I just don't know that you guys are college students. You're not in 6th grade, so if you're not going to read, you're not. That's you're not going to read. But anyway, that's sort of. Would you feel? Do y'all like more of the nuts and bolts of hearing, like, for example, all about contract law, or would you rather have broader discussions about bigger issues in contract law or criminal law? Yeah. That's why we do one lecture and one discussion. But anybody have any complaints? You won't hurt my feelings. No? What's your complaint? Good. That's an A for Mr. Edgerton. Just kidding. I also think that too, well, I don't know. We're going to get into that. But if anybody has any other feedback, I would love that. Anybody have any questions on internships? Any comments on internships, Mick? Well, I think you're supposed to be able to kind of research Handshake is where available things are. But I think more internships are generated by the student and the employer matching up together rather than the student scrolling through Handshake and, just clicking on an opportunity. I think more of them come that way, although I would like for us to have a bigger catalog of opportunities. But I think, so that's one way they come is student, employer don't know each other. They match through Handshake. But I think most of them come with, they've already made the match somehow. Yeah. And I think it's a little bit lazy of faculty, and that's me, that we all know plenty of employers in this community in our area. I mean, if any one of y'all came to me and said, can you get me an internship at a law firm, I could do that tomorrow. I mean, that's not a problem. Your IT people, they know the people at TSYS and AFLAC and all that. I mean, their connections are there. So if you're interested in an internship but you don't know what job you want, call me. Explain to me what you think you want to do, what your study is, what your interests are, and I'll find you an employer. I mean, that's doable. And I think that kind of experience is probably worth as much to you as anything you learn in a class. So I got lucky in getting assigned the internship thing because I think that's really an important thing that we can do. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about environmental law in the time we have left. So the first article I want you to pull up on Cougar View is the one entitled Overview Key Federal Environmental Laws. So this is going to be really kind of really high level and basic, but we're just going to go through some of the main ones. Environmental law is at the federal level, so Congress passes these laws that apply to everybody, but environmental law is also a creature of state law, so each state could have their own separate environmental laws, and then local municipalities could also have their own as well. So it's not an area that's just federal or just state or just local. If you're worried about environmental compliance, you need to be worried about compliance with all three of those areas of law. It is also very technical in that, let's take the Clean Air Act, for example. That's the first one we're going to talk about. It talks about and moderates, regulates the amount of emissions and pollutants that sources can put out, both point source like factories or mobile sources like cars and things like that. And so it would be impossible to write in the actual statute of the Clean Air Act all of the different regulation levels for different emissions and different gases and different pollutants and all that. So when Congress passes a law like the Clean Air Act, it very broadly states we want to have clean air, we want to limit pollution, and it's up to the Environmental Protection Agency to make all the rules that carry out the intent of the Clean Air Act. So remember at the very beginning of the semester, we talked about administrative law, which are rules and regulations made by government agencies. Environmental law is very, very, very heavily administrative law because the Environmental Protection Agency on the federal level, and then each state will have their own state environmental agencies that are charged with making up all the rules that everybody has to follow about clean air, about the environment, and with enforcing them too. So it's very regulatory driven, it's very agency driven. The National Environmental Protection Act, which we'll talk about in a minute, NEPA, is, I think it's like 6 pages long. But it is, I mean, I think that the law itself is 6 pages, but the regulations that implement that law probably are volumes and volumes and volumes. So it is a really technical and detailed area when you get into compliance and things like that. So most of the laws we're talking about on the federal level are going to be enforced by the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. This is all relatively new in the law. These environmental laws first came about in around 1970, and that's when the Environmental Protection Agency was established. So this to you guys well, and me too, I guess. I was not born until 1972, so this is all stuff that's consistent over our lifetime. But to our parents and older generations, environmental law is still something they didn't always have. So the Clean Air Act was passed in 1970, and as you can imagine, it's been amended several times. It's had to be updated because there are a lot of environmental problems and issues we have today that we didn't have in 1970, unfortunately. I put a picture in your outline of a city in Pennsylvania in 1948 and the smog problem they had from pollution from these factories. That picture was taken at noon. So it's completely dark. The street lights are on. People are driving their cars with their lights on. You cannot see. That was before we had things like the Clean Air Act and we had environmental regulations. So basically what the Clean Air Act does is it identifies certain pollutants. They're called criteria pollutants, and there's 6 of them. And they're sort of the main ones that this law governs. They are ozone, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and lead. And the law charges the EPA with setting different emission levels for these different things in different settings. So if you own a factory or you work at a factory and some of your output is sulfur dioxide, then the Clean Air Act and the EPA would say how much sulfur dioxide you can put into the environment. It doesn't necessarily prohibit it. It just says what an acceptable legal level of pollution is, basically. The Clean Water Act is just a lot of these things are kind of obvious. I mean, Clean Water Act obviously governs water, but it is not drinking water. We have a separate law for drinking water. It's the Clean Drinking Water Act. But Clean Water Act is more like lakes, rivers, ponds. This one sentence kind of sums it up. It makes it unlawful for any person to discharge any pollutant from a source point into navigable waters of the United States unless they have obtained a special permit allowing such an activity from the EPA. A lot of what the EPA does is permitting. But if you want to do some of these discharges, you want to do some of these activities, you got to get a permit for it. And that's sort of their way of regulating, giving you permission to do X amount of pollution, but saying you can't go over that, and then to be able to monitor that. Now, obviously, if you're doing it without a permit, then you're just breaking the law, period. But that's kind of how that works. A lot of these laws have acronyms. The next one is CERCLA. That stands for the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. And that is a law that governs how we clean up contaminated sites. So it's, a lot of these things are preventative. They're designed to keep pollutants from going to the environment. But CERCLA deals with what happens once a site is contaminated. CERCLA is also known as Superfund. It's kind of the other name that you'll hear for it. And the reason it's called that is because CERCLA set up a federal trust account to pay for cleanup, and it was called the Superfund. And it was paid into by taxes on fuel and other industries that are involved in pollution. We're paying taxes, and I think at its highest point, I think your material says It had $8.5 billion in it at one time. It is now run out. It's at zero because Congress did not renew the taxes that funded it. So eventually Superfund ran out of money cleaning up contaminated sites. It doesn't mean that they don't do it anymore. It just means that now cleanup is paid for by Congress. They just allocate money and they budget money to do it instead of raising the money through taxes. So CERCLA provides that a couple different ways that we respond to a contaminated site. One is, and they are removal and remediation. Removal happens when we've got a dirty site and it's dangerous right now, and there are chemicals or some kind of toxic pollutant, and we got to remove them because they present a threat of safety to citizens or the environment or animals or plants right now. We got to go in, and we've found some abandoned drums of oil on this piece of land, and it's contaminating the groundwater, and it's contaminating the stream, and it's got to be removed right now. Sort of the emergency part of it. Remedial is, well, it's not emergent. This site has been contaminated for years. We got to clean it up, not necessarily remove the things right now. We got to go about cleaning it up, getting it safe to be used again, hopefully restore it to where it can be used safely for whatever reason. And so that's sort of the two responses that Superfund has. Now, who pays for the cleanup? I talked about the trust fund paying for it and also Congress appropriating money to pay for it. But CERCLA also says that if you are a person who either caused the problem or may have caused the problem, they would designate you as a potentially responsible party or a PRP. And CERCLA and Superfund give the government the right to do the removal, do the cleanup, and send you the bill. So if you owned a gas station in the 50s and you were, I don't know, your site's contaminated for whatever reason, but you sold it, you might not be off the hook for contamination that you were responsible for. So I would like to think that the list of places that need that kind of cleanup would diminish over time because, you know, if you think about it, before 1970, we really didn't have any comprehensive environmental regulation. So people could contaminate legally. And people also did things that we didn't know at the time that it was contaminating, or we didn't know it was going to be dangerous later on. I think that those sites should be less and less and less because we're not doing that anymore. But who knows? Maybe there are new ways of polluting. Mick says maybe. Maybe we are also creating new ways of polluting that in 50 years we'll be like, we didn't know we were doing it then, but you know, here we are again. So that's kind of how that works. Some places can get nominated to put on the list for cleanup. I mean, it doesn't have to be that the government discovers it. Like a state government could refer it to Superfund. Citizens could bring it to the attention of the EPA, and it gets put on a list. It gets evaluated. They got all these criteria. They'll come in and evaluate it. They've got these, they evaluate the hazard risk by certain criteria, and then they score it. And then if your score is high enough, you would qualify for Superfund action. But there are, I think that they keep a list of like the top 10. There's a list of anything that's undergoing Superfund at any time. You can go online and look at it, and you can see what the top priorities are. And you'll see on there too that a lot of these, and I've listed the top 10, I think, in your materials, a top 10 current sites or recently current sites. And you'll see that a lot of them will say this site's been on the list for 15 years, or this site's been on the list since 2014. It's not a quick or a cheap thing to clean up a contaminated site. So it does take a while. I think your materials give an example from what's in a different article, but it gives an example of Robins Air Force Base, which is over in Middle Georgia near Macon. And it talks about that they had an unlined landfill that they were disposing oils and solvents used in aircraft maintenance operation. Because Robins is an Air Force base, right? Is that right? So they were disposing of all this aircraft stuff in an unlined unlined landfill. It leached into the groundwater, and then they have found a connection between that pollution and some neurological diseases and some cancer. So that needed to be cleaned up. And so Superfund paid for that. I guess they sent the bill to themselves since that was a government site that was polluted. I guess the potentially responsible parties were the Air Force. So I'm not sure how that worked out in paying for it, but they did that. They discontinued the use of that landfill in 1978. They started cleanup of that pit in 1991, and it finished in 1998. So these are just really, really intensive efforts when you're having to do that sort of cleanup. Let me see what else I want to hit. The Endangered Species Act, you're probably familiar a little bit with this. That's just a government process that we have for identifying species of wildlife, fish, and plants that are endangered or in danger of extinction or in danger of low numbers that need to be protected in some way and hopefully restored. So the Endangered Species Act provides for how we score, how we determine whether or not something's endangered or threatened. Threatened is the level a little bit above endangered. Threatened is, hey, if we don't do something, this species is going to become endangered. That's backwards. Threatened, endangered, dead. Yes, I mean, threatened comes first. We're identifying things that if we don't do something, they'll become endangered. And if we don't do something, once they become endangered, they will be extinct. Right? Okay, thank you. That's right. So that's sort of how that works. The way that comes into business law is that the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, one I was talking about earlier, says that, I'm kidding, says that, we're glad you're here, that anytime the federal government undertakes a major project, and there are pages and pages and pages of what major project means under the law, but anytime they undertake a major project, think construction of roads, construction of a power plant, but it's very broad definition. It includes anything the government spends money on. They have to do an environmental impact assessment. And that gets put into an environmental impact statement, which is a written report. They're usually way over 100 pages long, and they have all kinds of exhibits. And what that does is it requires, before the project starts, there has to be a comprehensive assessment of the effect on the environment of this project. So, for example, I'm skipping around through all of your assigned readings, but I want to skip to the criteria on environmental impact statement. So, the standard contents of one is it's going to introduce the proposed action, whatever the project is. It's going to talk about the purpose and need. You got to justify that this is something that is benefits outweigh the costs, or that once we mitigate the costs, it substantially outweighs it. That may depend on your perspective as to whether or not you think it's needed. But it will describe the affected environment, so that kind of provides a baseline of, okay, here's the environmental situation on the ground for this project. This is the baseline. And all of these environmental impact statements include a section that says the impact if we don't do the project. So that we're always evaluating if we do nothing versus if we do the project, or if we do this remedial measure. We got to start at status quo. So it's not like we're jumping to what's the least costly way we can do it. You still got to evaluate the least costly way you can do it against not doing it at all. So that's part of the environmental impact statement. You'll have to evaluate a range of alternatives. That's really the heart of the environmental impact statement. Here are all the different things we could do. And here are the effects of each of them. Here are the ways that we might mitigate the risks or the adverse consequences of what we've planned. So that will include things like, this is very, very broad. I hope that's a takeaway. You've got to look at the impacts to threatened or endangered species. That is animals, plants, fish. That includes creatures that you don't even know exist. Some little snail, some little invertebrate that only lives under a bridge in Cook County, Georgia. That is, I'm going to choose my words right. Nobody uses it, nobody eats it, nobody has it. It doesn't have a human benefit necessarily, but it has an ecological benefit as part of the larger system. I don't mean to say that there are creatures that don't mean anything, but just saying something that might not be missed. Got to take into account all that. Air impact on the air quality, impact on water quality, that's pretty obvious. But you also got to look at impacts to historical sites, impacts to cultural sites, specifically if it involves indigenous peoples. So those get really heightened protection, which is why you'll see, does anybody follow what is the project where the people were doing the sit-in to prevent the pipeline? Was that in the Dakotas? Is that right, Mick? Dakota Access Pipeline. Yeah, there were people that were just camping out in the trees. And I can't remember. I don't know what exactly has happened on it, but
I remember it sounds like the pipeline basically cracked. I think they're still trying to do it with the main two backers. The main company are trying to go back out and much work. I think one of the main American companies is still trying to do it.
but it had some component of indigenous peoples, didn't it?
The pipeline was going through, not only was going through burial land, for people that have ancestors, far back ancestors buried there, but it was also going through environmental.
Okay. So yeah, that got a lot of publicity and a lot of scrutiny, and some of the activists who were protesting that made a big difference in it. So that's one of the things they look at. Of course, you're going to look at social and economical impacts to communities, including things like property values, housing stock, businesses, traffic, things like that. I mean, it might be that yes, we can build this factory here or this plant, and we can mitigate the risks to the environment from the factory. But what about the fact that it's going to require 10,000 people to move into this area? Do we have the schools? Do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the roads? Do we have the sewage system? Do we have the ability to absorb the people and their impact on the environment? So that's obviously part of it too. Cost is one, schedule analysis. Anything that affects the coastline obviously gets heightened scrutiny, things like that. So environmental impact statements are very detailed. They're very scientific. It's not like I get to write one for my company. I mean, I've got to hire scientists and environmentalists and lawyers to help me write it in a way that will hopefully get accepted or approved by the EPA. But that's kind of how that works. So that's a little bit more detail on how the EPA works. Let me make sure I've mentioned everything I want to mention. We have the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, FIFRA, that regulates the use of pesticides and things like that. I didn't know or didn't realize until I was preparing for lecture today that this law requires farmers and utility companies and anybody who uses pesticides that they have to register when they purchase those. And they also have to take an and pass a certification examination in order to apply them. And that makes sense to me. I just didn't realize that that was that we had that kind of oversight going on. The registration is particularly interesting. That supposedly someone somewhere is tracking who's buying them and where they're being used. I don't know in practice how that works. Clark. Yeah. Yeah. I buy the Roundup at Win Hardware and I put 7 Dust on my tomato plants, but I'm not registering there. It must be. I don't think so. No. I mean, there's no way Roundup would be out of business if they were requiring everybody to register. It must be in bulk. Anybody know the answer to that? You do that in Kentucky? Do y'all like the environment in Kentucky? You do? Okay, good. Good deal. So that's kind of how that works. And then that's kind of the main points that I want to hit. Make sure you read though. I am going to do a quiz on this. So make sure you've read what I've outlined. It will not take you long. It's 4 relatively short articles. Anybody have any questions on environmental law? I'm glad. Okay, Mick, what's your question?
For local law, can that be better than the EPA laws or worse?
Great question. I'm glad I meant to mention this. So the federal laws are the baseline. A state or local ordinance or law cannot reduce anything below what's required by the federal government. They could increase them. They could increase protections. So if, for example, the federal government said we can only have, you can allow 10 particles per million of this pollutant, the state can't come in and undercut that and say we'll allow 8. But the state could come on top of that and say we're only going to allow 12. I did that backwards. The state can make it stricter. The state can't make it less restrictive. Does that make sense? Thank you for suggesting that we do this because I really do I think I'm going to keep this in our class. And I think it would be interesting to read not 100 pages, but a smaller environmental impact statement or something like that and just sort of get folks to see what's in them and what kind of,
Yeah, I recommend maybe drawing up an excerpt from the book Silent Spring.
Yeah. That was the book that started the whole environmental. Has anybody read that? Anybody read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson? A good book if you're interested. What did you say, Lexi? Oh, probably should. That would be a good one to read, I think. I'll confess. I've thought about reading it a bunch of times and I want to, but I never have. It is.
Not super long, but it is kind of.
All right. So with the last 5 minutes that we have, so I'm going to preach for a minute. I want y'all to know a couple things that I've learned from experience. And they may apply to you, they may not apply to you, but I'll feel better that I've said them. First one is this. Think for yourself. Don't let anybody else tell you how you ought to think. And that you may think that makes sense to you on a personal level. I don't want anybody to tell me how I've got to vote. I don't want anybody to tell me, that I can own a gun or I can't own a gun or something like that. But I mean in your careers. A lot of times we go into jobs and we think, well, I'm new. I'm just going to go along with what everybody's doing because I don't know any better. Or this person's my boss. They've been doing this for 20 years. Surely they know what they're doing. And I don't mean to discount that. There's a lot to be said for experience. It teaches us much more than we're going to learn in a book. Experience is a wonderful teacher. But don't just accept things that people tell you. Don't just accept that we're going to do things a certain way because that's the way we've always done them. Don't be afraid to speak up and ask why we do this. Why is it this way? What's the thinking behind this? What are we trying to accomplish? And is this really the right way to do it or the right way to think about it? We also think that if we ask those questions, that we're going to be penalized in some way. We also don't ask those questions because we think we're going to look stupid. But I will tell you that Some of the best questions and some of the people that I've respected the most are the people that weren't afraid to ask stupid questions. It showed that they were paying attention, and it showed that they were learning. There's no way that you're going to start a job and know everything, but we think we're supposed to, or at least I thought I was supposed to. I was afraid of asking those questions. I was afraid of rocking the boat. I just figured that with experience came knowledge of everything. I mean, from your job to marriage to parenting. And I've learned I don't know any more about parenting than I did when I started 25 years ago. I mean, I'd like to think I've learned some things, but it's not like you become an expert, okay? It's the same way in your jobs. You don't become an expert on something just because you've done it. People have different motivations than you do. And you'll never know for sure what everybody else's motivation is. And it's pointless to try to guess or try to figure out what somebody else's agenda is or what they really care about. That's a fool's errand. That's a waste of time. You need to know what you believe in, which is one of the reasons we did that code of ethics, which y'all did a great job on. And I challenge you to hold yourselves to that. Know what you believe in, what you will and won't do, and don't let anybody tell you how to think about anything. Don't be afraid to question. I was terrified to question anything because I thought I would look stupid. I thought it was something that I was already supposed to know. What I know now on the other side is nobody expected me to know anything. I wasn't supposed to know anything. I was supposed to ask the stupid questions. Explain this to me again. I have no idea how this works. Once somebody asks me that question and then I explain to them how it works, then I'm like, now they know. Now they know exactly the way that I understand it, and we've asked questions and we know where we stand on it. A lot of you guys have already learned a lot about this because most of you have jobs and have experience in all these things. I mean, Mr. Bryan could probably tell us from military experience, King, you could give us a list right now of 10 things you've learned in military that helps you out in your daily lives. No doubt. And that applies to everybody in every job that you have. So don't let anybody tell you how to think. Don't be afraid to ask questions. The other thing I would say is that the people who are most successful, in my opinion, are the people who take charge of their own destiny. The people who don't just sit back and wait on something to happen to them. They're the people who see what they want and they go for it. We sell ourselves short all the time because we don't dream big enough. And I know this is very cliche for me to say, but I'm a firm believer in it. If you have a goal and you set out to do it, you'll be surprised how fast you get there, especially in the business world. I mean, this idea that, we're going to have to work 60 years and we're going to have to put in our time and maybe, before we retire, we'll finally get there. Bullshit. Go for it now. You can do it. And if you're at a place where you can't, then go somewhere else where you can. You can. I promise you. The people who are successful are the ones that are hustling and the ones who are taking charge of their own destiny. That is almost universal. But we're not built like that. We're not trained to act that way. But we should be, in my opinion. The last thing I'll say, too, is I think that in American education, from first grade all the way up through college, we don't focus enough on creativity and individual thinking and critical thinking. And when I say creativity, I don't mean like everybody needs to be an artist. I don't mean that. Creativity comes in all kind of different flavors and colors. You can be creative even if your job is not a creative job. But we don't encourage that enough. And again, I'm not talking about I'll sit down and draw pictures. That's important. But we don't have enough emphasis in our learning on things that inspire or encourage creativity. even on very small levels. And I think that's hugely important to your development. Even if you think, oh, I'm not a creative person, you are in your own way. And if you nurture that and pay attention to it and become aware of it, then it will enhance whatever job you're doing. I promise you it will. If anybody has any questions about anything we've talked about today, the whole semester, if anybody has questions about internships, if anybody has, I was about to say life questions, I would not be the person to ask life questions to. But I could tell you about all the mistakes I've made, and maybe that would help you, because I made a bunch. But if anybody needs anything going forward, please let me know. That's what we're here for. That's what I view as one of the most important things for a professor to do, is to encourage students. And so if I can do that for you in whatever way, please let me know. I will tell you a secret. And I promise, I've probably said this before, but I don't just say this. This is the best class I've ever had in terms of engagement and how smart you are and your participation and your level of interest in all this. This is my favorite class that I've had. So thank you for that. Please continue to do that. And I just wish y'all best of luck. And I'm really sad that this is the last week. I wish we hadn't canceled class last week. Notice how I said we? Collective guilt, that's right. I don't know that I'd go back and read it. So Thursday, come to class prepared to listen, to engage, to ask questions. Your assignment is going to ask you to give back to me some things that you learned from the speaker. So you will need to actually show up and listen and pay attention. I will see y'all Thursday.